With the onset of open banking, NFTs, and the rise of cryptocurrency, and Elon Musk hosting SNL, may as well throw that in there, it would be an understatement to say that the fintech and financial services space is an exciting yet competitive landscape. And not to mention, this was such a competitive year for our fellows that it feels a little cliche to say that these are companies to watch, but we truly feel that way about these next founders and their startups. I will let them introduce themselves, but first, our moderator, Chris O'Neill, a purpose-driven investor and technology leader with over 20 years of experience, including general management of some of the world's most beloved brands, such as Google, HSBC, and Evernote, the Gap, where he serves on the board of directors. He's a partner at Portage Ventures, the venture capital arm of Sagard Holdings, a multi-strategy global alternative investment platform. Prior to Portage, Chris was CEO, president, and chairman of Evernote, where he orchestrated its successful turnaround. As an angel investor, he focuses on exceptional Canadian entrepreneurs building enduring companies like Ritual, Relay, who's been acquired by Kik, Layer 6, acquired by TD Bank, and Helpful, acquired by Shopify. Chris, without further ado, welcome to Meet the Fellows 2021. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for that kind introduction and that great pun. I'm a punster, but I will not subject people to it. I got some kids for that, but I'm thrilled to be here. Greetings to the C100 community, 48 hours participants, and depressed crypto traders. I'm sorry, is it too soon? Yes, I think it might be. I'm Chris, as Lauren mentioned. I'll be your cruise director for the rest of this 29.5 minutes left. I actually shared a bit of my background. I'll give you a little bit of just the Canadian flavor there, born and raised in Toronto. My parents had a Canadian Tire store, so I pretended to work on the floor of my Canadian Tire store. I got my start in fintech by counting the coupons. They no longer exist anymore, so I'm dating myself. I'm an oddball in my family because I'm not in retail. I pursued a career in tech and have been in and out of the Valley for about 20 years or so, including some of the things that Lauren said. And about a year or so ago, I joined the dark side, switched to the other side of the table, and I'm doing late stage investing for Portage and really enjoying that switch of perspectives. And as I said, I love angel investing and advising companies, and I always try to prioritize Canadian companies or Canadian roots. So really we're in for a treat today because we've got three fantastic founders and entrepreneurs who are really doing some pretty incredible things at the beginning of a really awesome renaissance or just a thriving period for Canada. So I'm going to briefly introduce them and then ask them to share a little bit about their company and themselves. We'll dive into questions. We're going to try to keep this interactive, so you know where the chat, the comment section are off to the right-hand side of this of the window. Feel free to enter your questions, your comments, and complaints about the government. We'll try to pick them up and weave them into the conversation organically as appropriate, and then we'll save some time towards the end. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to start with Andrew Chau. Andrew Chau is the co-founder and CEO of Neo Financial, a startup that's setting out to modernize everyday banking and rewards for Canadians. He was, of course, a part of the founding team of Skip the Dishes, another iconic Canadian startup. And he began his career as a consultant at BCG. And he graduated with great distinction, I might add, great distinction from the University of Saskatchewan. I think that means he's a smarty pants. Next up is Norm. Norm is co-founder and co-CEO of SAVVYY. Most recently, he was involved with capital markets head of capital markets at Borrowell. Spent a lot of time in financial services and debt capital markets at RBC, Citadel, Merrill Lynch, and began his career as a corporate lawyer in London and New York. And continuing the theme of underachieving, he grabbed his law degree at Harvard, and then also his undergrad from Cal out here in these parts. Last but certainly not least is Yoseph West. He's currently the co-founder and CEO of Relay Financial, which is banking for growing businesses. Prior to Relay, Yoseph was part of an amazing crew at HubSpot, our friends, the Jamies. He led marketing through the successful acquisition by Xero. So I'm going to pass it to each of the founders to give a little bit of a voiceover. And as I said, we'll jump into two questions. Yoseph, since you're up on the screen, why don't you give a bit of an overview on yourself that I didn't cover?
Sure.
And Relay, and then we'll pass it.
One tiny small change on the bio. It was HubDoc, not HubSpot.
My bad.
We have many funny stories. the first piece of press we ever got, the person wrote HubSpot like throughout it instead of HubDoc. So it's common. Yeah, like Relay is next generation banking for employer SMBs. The core challenges that these businesses face are really around like collaboration, both internally with team members. You can think about that as just like something as simple as issuing a card to like, a department head or something like that, all the way to external parties like advisors, accountants, and bookkeepers, and making that really simple. And then we also make automation kind of part of the package. Our belief is that banking is being rebundled. And so we have deep functionality around like AP automation as well as expense management. We just raised the Series A from Bain Capital, growing quickly, and we're kind of off to the races.
Fantastic. Congrats.
Thanks.
Andrew?
Awesome. Well, thanks for that great intro, Chris. And yes, it was great distinction. I don't know how you found that out, but sure.
I have my ways.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think you covered most of that intro. I think, I am, Prairie born and raised here in Canada, originally from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. So where Neo is headquartered here in Calgary as well. We have an office in Winnipeg, and we've built a lot of our network here in the prairies in Winnipeg, Calgary, Saskatoon. So that's probably what you'll hear, throughout throughout the next 30 minutes. But with Neo, really what we're doing is reimagining the whole banking stack and financial services for Canadians. We're focused on Canada. And for us, we're just taking a little bit of a different approach, focusing not only building consumer brand, but also focusing on retailers, small business, and enterprise through our rewards network that we're building out, and it just happens to sit on top of a banking stack.
Amazing, Andrew. Thank you so much. Norm?
Sure, thanks, Chris. So SAVVYY is a digital mortgage platform, and we're an enterprise model, which is different than Andrew and Yoseph. So we power banks and other lenders. Customer journeys for mortgage lending are notoriously broken. And that's really a function of decades-old technology in the back end that the banks are using. And so what we're really up to is giving them new infrastructure and giving them and their teams the tools they need to shine. The reason they trust us is we have a lot of experience. SAVVYY is our third bank-grade lending platform. Fun fact, most of our founding team was together at Borrowell, which is both a C100 company and, of course, a Portage company. And in terms of recent accomplishments, we're now working with our third bank in Canada, and we more than tripled our team from 15 to 48 people through the pandemic. So we think we're getting pretty good at remote recruiting too.
Amazing. Thanks everyone for setting the stage. Andrew, I'm gonna turn to you first, and really we're gonna have maybe three sections to our conversation. The first is really just more of a general perspective on entrepreneurship and being a founder. The second, we're gonna dive a little bit into Fintech, a couple of themes and frame like the thesis, and really you guys are already starting to touch on that, of course, in terms of the motivation for each of your respective companies. And then we'll bring it home with a little bit more of a kind of a personal story about your journey as founders, and potentially sharing and dispensing some wisdom to this great crew that's joining us here today. But Andrew, I want to start with you. As I said, 2 months ago, you wrote something I found really interesting and inspirational. And perhaps a good definition of entrepreneurship as I've come across. You said everyone at Neo is betting on themselves by diving into the unknown, taking the road less traveled, and challenging the status quo. And we're really proud of our team that works tirelessly to build something truly meaningful in Canada. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What was your thinking behind that, and what motivated you to write that, and in many ways start another exciting chapter at Neo?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those pieces where you look at entrepreneurship and you look at company building. And when I reflect back in terms of what we were able to build with Skip and what we're building with Neo today, a big part of it is really around the team. I think everyone here can back me up on that. That you don't build a company without a team. And even though it doesn't really matter when you join a company, everyone does sort of bet on themselves to take a risk, right? I mean, when you're really, really small, it's like, you have no idea what's going to happen, but everyone says, hey, I believe in myself, and I believe I can actually grow the company, or I can contribute here or there. And I think that's, the reason I wrote that was I always find it just amazing when you step back from it all and you have a team of 200 people, and every one person on the entire team wouldn't be able to build the company that you have. But when you combine 200 people who are, the way I like to define it, is more like a band of misfits, where everyone has different backgrounds, different experiences. When you put them all in the same room, all driving towards the same mission and ambition, you can create something really, really special. And that's really the reason why we're doing building Neo today. And because if we don't do it, no one else will. And I think that's hopefully everyone else on the panel here and in the group here too can say the same thing too.
Yeah, thank you, Yoseph. So you're at HubDoc. You decided a great run, and now you decided to Relay. I'm just curious about, how did the experiences that you had with some great entrepreneurs and a wonderful team shape your thinking at the formation stage, and now as you think about scaling up something, and obviously congrats again on your successful raise. That's amazing, and everyone is rightfully excited. But how did that shape your thinking, the last experience, and how do you channel that going forward?
Yeah, I think there's like kind of two parts to it. I think there's kind of the company building and like what opportunity do you go after. I think that's like one part of the equation. And then I think the other is like, how do you really build like a world-class team? And how do you build a world-class culture? Going through that experience of like, I remember starting to work with the James, I was like third employee, and we had, nothing. Right. And kind of like crying into our pillows at night as we're like trying to get our revenue up 20%. And that was like $200. Right. And kind of seeing the impact over time of like, not only the power of compounding, but as a big macro trend and macro shift started to occur in our market, which was like cloud accounting. And so the market eventually tipped in 2015. So we thought about like, how do we as entrepreneurs actually think about a big wave that's coming? And the big wave that's like very clear and that both Andrew and Norm are taking advantage of is digital banking, and the digital experience will be the default in 10 years. And so when we decided to start Relay, there was a big motivation around like, hey, business banking is actually an area that has huge pain points. And that's really where we focused. And that was one of the biggest lessons.
Amazing. Both of you have touched on team, and I love the expression, I believe it was Vinod Khosla that said, the team you build is the company you built, right? Or vice versa. I mean, so I'm curious about how you're going about it in the early days when that's really all you have, right? In addition to the problem you're aiming to solve, like how have you thought about it in light of home field advantage in Canada, right? Access to great talent. How you thought about key hires? I'll just open, actually maybe just open this up to you, maybe Norm to start, and if others want to chime in with others, that would be fantastic. But talk to me about your team and any other maybe counterintuitive things that you found helpful in hiring in Canada.
Sure, and in some ways we've got a very unusual story. We've got a team that's been together really at its core for a decade. So my co-founder Sal, as well as Craig and Alvina, they worked together at Paradigm Quest, which is a great Canadian player that no one's ever heard of in the mortgage space a decade ago. They were the founding tech team of Borwell, and they're really on a mission. They are on a mission on lending technology, and Sal in particular sets a really warm tone from the top that has led people to follow him from one banner to the next. Mm-hmm. That's certainly made our lives easier. Incredibly, we were really worried when we had to switch to remote work as to whether that warmth would still cascade through the organization. And it takes work, but it can. I'm pretty sure we've managed to pass it on to those who've joined us kind of post-pandemic as well. So pretty proud about that.
That's incredible. So loyalty, keeping the band together through lots of different journeys, different challenges. Andrew, I remember Josh sharing some amazing stories about some resourcefulness. You guys brought in something like 87 Brazilians to work in Winnipeg, which is just amazing, right? So like, have you? I mean, you can talk about that as an idea, but how have you been resourceful at a time when the battle for talent, in all markets, especially Canada, is heating up? How have you thought about it? Any creative hacks or any mindsets or approaches that you found to be useful?
Yeah, I mean, talent is one area that's, whether you're hiring 10 years ago, hiring now, it's always one of those constraints that I think every company has. And what we've, found works is really just trying to be creative and finding the opportunities in places that aren't, that either harder to do or take a bit more time. So, in the example that you gave, at one point in time, we were hiring more engineers than the schools were producing. So we had to look elsewhere, and we sort of were a part of the first global talent stream sort of visa program, which is hopefully everyone here can get access to that and bring talent from abroad. Streamlines the process from like 6 months. This is the great thing about being Canadian, if there's other Americans on the stream here, but streamlines the process from like 6 months to have someone land here in Canada and start working down to like 6 weeks. So it's an amazing program that helped us tremendously. We've used it quite a bit here at NEO as well. And we work really closely with the government, in Alberta and Manitoba as well, just to ensure that we can keep the pipeline sort of going on the talent side of things, because and then at the same time help with the organic pipeline within. So yes, we could pull from different companies and startups within the ecosystem, but because we're all growing really quickly, there's still not enough talent to keep up. So you sort of have to build up the pipeline. So we've got, training regimens, we've got boot camps, we've got all of these things that we're doing on the side to really plan for the next 3, 4, 5 years as well. So there's a lot of things going on. I probably can't list them all, but those are 2 of the things that we're working on.
Thank you. We're going to shift into the fintech specific section of the conversation. And if you think way back, like even, I don't know, 5-10 years ago and into pre-pandemic days, banking in Canada in particular seemed to be premised on 2 things, right? So you had to offer all products, right? Whether that's core banking or lending or corporates or small business, to all customers through all channels, right? And like, it doesn't take rocket scientists to figure out that they're going to get a lowest common denominator effect, right? So I'm curious, and I'll direct this to you, Norm. If you think about how this is being reshaped, I mean, it was just submitted that like in 5 to 10 years, digital by default. We could debate whether that's sooner or later, but I'm just curious, Norm, but your perspectives. Like, what are the implications for companies, startups, consumers, and then customers in the context of B2B, and which I know you're focused on too. So I'm just curious about your perspective, having lived in and around financial services for a long period of time. How do you see this evolving? What are the implications, and why should we care?
Sure. So a framework that I find helpful, I think people are tempted to always look at it by vertical, what's happening in banking, what's happening in lending, what's happening in wealth. Yeah. I prefer to kind of look at it at what's happening in direct to consumer, as Andrew and Yoseph are doing, what's happening in point solutions like Flinks, what's happening in enterprise solutions, because those things I think naturally have different cadences. And part of the reason I think fintech can feel so uneven is that those are actually really, really different hills to climb.
Yeah. So you're saying, hey, consumer experiences or experiences more generally are shaped across our lives, and it doesn't really matter. It's going to filter into all other elements of the experiences that we expect from all providers. Is that a fair assumption?
I think it is, but I think the channels through which it flows are differently greased. Interesting.
Part of what I don't think is a controversial statement is most people don't love their banks. And I'm gonna throw this one to you, Yoseph, as like, why is that, and how do you use that to your advantage to build a trusted relationship and experiences that engender trust, engender love?
Right. I mean, it is funny to think about, like, as I was reading through your email, it is funny to think that at one point banks were actually like a great service. And kind of what's happened is the expectations of consumers has shifted, and the fees that get charged compared to the value is very different. And so what we've seen over the last, call it like 7 years, a lot of the core parts of the banking function have actually been outsourced, especially in like the small business context. It's the reason, Bill.com is like a multi-billion-dollar company. It's because these banks aren't able to deliver the software that, say, business owners actually require. And we've seen this shift where people are building point services or point solutions around the bank. And our fundamental belief is that like SMBs have actually like app fatigue, or like are tired of having to kind of hodgepodge together this like ERP for their small business back office. And the value that can actually be provided now that like kind of the banking layer has been commoditized is to build software that delivers a lot of value. And so, one of the core services that we provide is centralizing not only kind of multi-tenant banking or multi-user banking, but also like integrating accounts payable automation. So you can actually centralize all your bills, you can set up financial controls. And that is kind of like, in our view, the future. It's that mesh between software and banking. And just, the big banks, as much as they might try, and they're good people there, it's pretty hard for them to kind of find software DNA late in life.
Yeah. Wouldn't they say, if I put my banker hat on, I was one for like about a year before someone had to die or retire before I got a promotion. So I was like, I think it might be time for me to move on. But they would say regulatory, right? Oh, we're regulated to death. And I that's what they would say as part of the solution. But I'm just curious for the audience, for the panel, anyone who's interested, take this one. How do you navigate that, right? So oftentimes there's the fintech, there's the fin part of fintech, and there's a tech part. And I've seen companies like Lending Club as one example that seem to think that the regular gravity didn't apply, right? That they're just a tech company and therefore they don't have to kind of adhere to the financial regulatory framework. I'm just curious as to how you think about that, because I know that's what the banks say. We're hemmed in by all this regulatory stuff that these other companies don't have to deal with. How do you think about that tension that exists in fintech between the regulatory environment and the catcher and all that stuff, which plays a role, obviously, but also might get in the way? Anyone want to take that one?
I might jump in. They're regulated. That doesn't mean they can't change. It affects their pace of change. And so one of the approaches we take as a solution provider to the incumbents is to get in as a trusted partner. We don't walk into a C-suite for a complex sale, telling them to change their credit box or telling them to implement AI tomorrow. We go in telling them it's robust, it's secure, it's future-proofed, and once we get in, we're going to show you what else it can do.
Got it. Any other perspectives?
Yeah, I remember talking to a banking lawyer very early on in our journey, and the piece of advice that stuck with me was to make compliance like core to your DNA as a company. So while we might not be formally regulated, we think about this stuff, and do we think about how we can be creative around it to deliver a great experience for our customers? Certainly, but I also agree with Norm. I don't think it's necessarily the regulation that limits innovation, right? Like you look at Monzo in the UK, which is one of the consumer neobanks and really the pioneers in this space, and they have a banking charter. They are a bank, and they're still able to innovate and deliver a lot of value for customers. So regulation is an easy crutch, I think, in that context.
I'm getting some flashcards for time here from Lauren, so we're gonna shift it towards the close here. I just, on a more personal level, I'm curious. This will be a kind of a lightning round. I'm going to ask all three of you guys a quick answer to basically say, okay, a silver lining in COVID. This could be a personal or professional silver lining, and or what's one thing that you've done, right? Being an entrepreneur, being a founder, the best of times is difficult. In a global pandemic, probably even harder. I'm just curious, silver lining or one thing that you've done to ensure your self-care, to make sure that you have the fuel in the tank to continue a long and sometimes arduous journey. Perhaps I'll start with you, Andrew. You're smiling bright. I'm sure you have something you've done.
Yeah, I think silver lining during the pandemic, downside. I'll start with the downside. Obviously, building a team, not being able to see them in person, building that relationship. We're excited to go back to the office, or at least have some form of that, coming up in the hopefully near future. Silver lining of that, we sort of grew our family this year, so I was able to spend a bit more time being able to see new baby around. So
congratulations.
Pretty unique in that way, and probably not that often you can do that. So That's sort of my silver lining, which enabled a bit more balance, if that makes sense, while still probably still worked a lot more, but yeah, that's probably my silver lining.
Okay, that's a tough act to follow. Who wants to follow the silver lining of a baby? Go ahead, Yoseph.
Yeah, that is a tough one. I think it was not even just a baby. It was like, yeah, we grew the team. Like, I miss everyone. Yeah, what was the silver lining? I mean, going into thinking about March 2020, I think we all thought the world was going to burn, right? And so us as a company, we battened down the hatches. We asked team members to do salary deferrals. We negotiated with every vendor that we had. And it was a tough year. It was a tough year to make it through and hold on to our cash, and to have come out this side of it, going from a very lean operation to having, candidly just a little more cash than we know exactly what to do with at this stage, I think is a huge silver lining. And I think it was because of the focus and that the pandemic forced for us as a business.
Thank you. Nor, bring us home.
Sure. I mean, look, the cold answer is that the silver lining is getting the banks to think off premises. I think the happier realization is that it's incumbent on us as leaders to make sure that we remember that we are the social outlet for our teams right now, and to make sure that it's not just all work.
Yeah, well said. That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for this great discussion. I know it was short but sweet. I enjoyed a bunch of it, all of it actually. I learned a bunch as well. So thank you. I just wanted to thank this esteemed panel. Thank you all for joining us here today. I'll pass it back to Lauren and the crew. And again, thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the show.